Welcome to Regent Park TV. I'm Kedar. Today, we bring you an insightful conversation with Kristyn Wong-Tam, Member of Provincial Parliament for NDP's Toronto Centre, who has been a dedicated advocate for the residents of Toronto Centre and beyond. Our RPTV reporter, Gabriel Meissner, sat down with Wong-Tam to discuss the critical challenges facing our communities, including the aftermath of Doug Ford's snap election, the ongoing U.S.-Canada trade war, and the impact of these political changes on neighborhoods like Regent Park, St. Jamestown, and Moss Park. Wong-Tam also shares her thoughts on rising costs, gentrification pressures, and how Toronto Centre can send a progressive voice to Ottawa as federal politics evolve. Let's dive into this timely conversation.
Hello, my name is Gabriel Meissner and you are watching Regent Park Television. Today I am with a special guest. Kristyn, would you like to introduce yourself?
I would love to. Hi folks, it's Kristyn Wong-Tam, your newly elected Member of Provincial Parliament for our great riding of Toronto Centre. Hello, Regent Parkers.
And I want to congratulate you on being re-elected.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
How does it feel being re-elected in this time that we're in, which is met with a lot of fear about the tariffs in the US-Canadian tariffs, and with Donald Trump being elected? Yeah. How does it feel being Member of Parliament at this time?
Yeah, that's an excellent question, Gabriel. I think that I would say that what you've just described is almost an understatement and overstatement at the same time. Understatement in some ways because this is a very significant time in the historical milestone of Canadian history. We're heading into a trade war with our biggest trading partner and our closest friend and ally, the United States of America. And at the same time, it's an overstatement because of the way Mr. Trump behaves. Rather sporadic. One day there's a trade war, the next day we're going to take a step back. And at the same time, what I recognize is that most politicians across the country at this moment are not paying attention to the local issues. So we are all putting our attention to what may or may not happen in the future with the president and whoever the prime minister will be, especially since we have a pending federal election. And the domestic issues are the ones that I think are really not getting the attention. So here provincially in Ontario, we know that the healthcare system is an absolute shambles and crisis. Our education system, the schools are crumbling. It was not necessarily addressed in the last provincial election. That was not the topic or the ballot box question. So I'm very concerned that people are continuing to feel hurt and harmed by the government's inaction. And although Mr. Ford won a third-term majority, he did not put forward the proposals and the solutions that I understand that Ontarians need. And Ontarians need rent control. They need to reduce the costs of, have their cost of living reduced. They need cheaper grocery. They need cheaper drugs and medicine if they get sick. They get access to healthcare. And that's really what we will continue to fight for. And that's what I'm very excited about going back to Queen's Park to fight for.
Now, I think people aren't fully aware that of what Doug Ford is doing about these issues, because people are focused on the tariff conflict, and Doug Ford is kind of making his whole base around fighting Trump. So how are you going to try and hold Doug Ford accountable in the public eye about these issues?
That's another significant question. I mean, obviously, Mr. Ford is a master storyteller. He's been able to weave a narrative in the public that, we needed a strong man to deal with the strong man in the U.S. And so he pushed that forward, even though it's a false narrative, to be quite honest, because, the premiers of this country are not going to sit down with the president of the United States. That just doesn't happen. Like it's rarely in an occasion where you have presidents and prime ministers sitting down with deputy ministers and deputy premiers at a regional level, especially for someone who's coming from out of the country. But at the same time, media likes to sell stories, and I think that it was very easy for them to lean into the fact that Fox News and CNN were regular stops for Mr. Ford. So he went down to the U.S. and he was selling himself as Captain Canada, while the Liberals in Ottawa were in a leadership vacuum. So he exploited the situation and he took advantage of it, and clearly it worked. But I know that in speaking to our community in Toronto Centre, talking to thousands of Regent Parkers, is that their biggest concern was the cost of living, the cost of housing, and what is government going to do about addressing public safety. Those were the three top concerns for Regent Park, and those three major concerns for our community was barely discussed by Mr. Ford, despite the fact that he pushed that type of narrative locally. That's what we talked about. So at the door, I responded by providing the NDP solution to address the housing crisis. More rent control, more government participation in building deeply affordable housing. I also advocated for investments in the healthcare system. So we needed to address that. We needed to make sure that everyone has a family doctor. I pushed forward locally to make sure that we were able to talk about what the NDP solution was for the high cost of groceries. Everything is going up. Your phone bills are going up, your energy cost is going up, your housing cost is going up. What are we going to do about it? So the NDP had put forward a proposal to provide a monthly grocery rebate for low-income earners to bring down the cost of food, so you don't have to decide on whether you pay your rent or you pay for your meal. So those are some of the things that I was more than happy to talk about. And I was really heartened because the community opened their doors to me and said, that's what we want to discuss. So I ran a local campaign, and I'm really pleased that the community was able to resonate to our message. And although Mr. Trump and Mr. Ford were playing headline battles, here locally we were talking about the issues that really mattered to our local community members, to our neighbors.
I think the issues that really matter, period, and people are distracted by this large headline distraction.
Yeah, which is not helpful. Like it's counterproductive in some ways if we continue to give the beast that is always hungry, this news energy, this news cycle, headlines that is easy for them to chase. We don't have leaders right now talking about, especially at the provincial level, we don't have leaders, especially out of the Conservative Party, talking about solutions that people need. We have Mr. Ford talking about saving, he's fighting tariffs by giving out corporate handouts. And so he put out a $40 billion package that doesn't really talk about saving jobs, saving paychecks. So just like we saw during the COVID pandemic, the Conservatives and Liberals will probably put out more initiatives that will bail out big corporations. So money that will be taxpayer dollars going to enrich shareholders of corporate companies, private companies, under the banner of saving jobs. But we know what happens is that if you give that money, public dollars, without any strings, we will see those shareholders and the directors of those boards enrich themselves and not take care of the workers. It's happened every single time. So if there is going to be a bailout, a support for anybody during the tariff war, it's got to be focused on workers, families, and the paycheck of the working and middle class.
Right. You touched on this. How is this, or how have you seen this, if you have seen this, impact marginalized communities within Regent Park, St. Jamestown, Moss Park?
I mean, that's an excellent question. When it comes to our local community, how do we ensure that local neighborhoods are going to be resistant and resilient towards tariffs, which are extra duty taxes? We have to be able to center the family. This is why I was saying, like, if there's going to be any type of government investment to supporting folks who are impacted by the trade war, it has to be starting with individuals and families who are going to be impacted by income, paychecks. And so if the priority is just handing out dollars without conditions, government public dollars without conditions, then the board of directors, the shareholders can do whatever they want, which we saw them do during the COVID pandemic. Government money came in to help offset harm created by the global pandemic. And the Liberal government, the Conservative governments flooded the marketplace with money, said that the companies needed them. Those companies never bailed out their workers. They bailed out themselves. So I believe, and I know my party is strongly committed to making sure that any type of public investment going back to companies to support workers have to be done with conditions. We give you the money to continue to pay your workers, that's fine. However, you need to make a commitment to us that the money flows to workers. And so we can do that by a couple of things. How we in Ontario can support our workers today is bringing in real rent control. Everybody is struggling with the cost of living. If we can bring in real rent control, build more affordable housing, then there's less sort of paycheck dollars going to corporate landlords. Mm-hmm. You get to keep more for your family in order for you to feed your family and take care of your family. Mm-hmm. So that's something that the provincial government can do to help working families today, even without a trade war. You can do that today. The Ford government has been in power for now 7 years. They haven't done it. The Liberals have been in power for 15 years prior. They didn't do it. So the solutions have always been there, but you have governments who are beholden to corporate interests. And when they receive big corporate donations from big corporate landlords, they're probably not going to pass legislation that's going to hurt their biggest donors. Definitely. Whereas the NDP is committed to workers, farmers. We're committed to building up Ontario from the grassroots and community up. Our commitment is to making sure that our community is supported. That's the first and to be quite honest, most important priority.
I feel like it's really hard to reach people. Like it's really hard to actually show people that these things are important, mm-hmm. and that these headlines aren't very important, or not important yet, aren't important to them yet.
Yeah. Or they are important, but they shouldn't take up all the importance.
All the importance, right? Yeah. How, in your experience, what is the best way that you found to reach people?
I love that question because it's actually it's an easy answer for me, Gabe. Personal conversations, and it's not just personal conversations from me as a politician to the community. It's personal conversations between neighbors. It's personal conversations at the dining room table, the breakfast table, the lunch table. Whenever community comes together to think about what the solutions are to the problems that exist in their daily lives, how we can make their existence easier, happier, more prosperous, they come up with the solutions. So what we don't do well, or as well, I should say, is that we're not talking to each other anymore. We're kind of talking at each other over social media. Somebody posts something, somebody responds to it, and then there's like this sort of banter that goes back and forth. But just like the way you and I are having this conversation, we're able to have a fluid dialogue. Mm-hmm. But if you were to post something online and expect that to be the conversation, you're not receiving it in real time. Mm-hmm. I'm not able to feel your presence in the room and how my words really affected you online. But we can do that in person. Yeah. In person, I can see your reaction. Yeah. I can see where your eyes are moving. So I know that we're having a real connection. Mm-hmm. But if you and I were to have this conversation over email, it's going to be totally different.
Very different.
Yeah, so that's how we're going to break through the loud and noisy, distracting headlines. We have to spend more time with each other in community, in families, wherever we are, our place of worship, may it be a mosque or a temple. When it comes to talking to our neighbors in the schoolyard, I go pick up my son from school. I have to, hang out with all the other parents waiting for their children. And that is a perfect opportunity to just have a real dialogue. And, sometimes you run into people in the grocery store, another opportunity to have a real conversation. Maybe not a long conversation, but during that period of time, it should be personal, it should be intentional.
As the federal landscape shifts with Mark Carney as Prime Minister, how do you think his leadership will affect Ontario's approach to addressing these challenges?
That is a pretty interesting question. I do not know Mr. Carney, never met him. He definitely has a very impressive resume if you are impressed with big bankers. And I'm not one who is going to be gushing at his feet, to be quite honest, because my experience with those who run institutions, the ones who run big corporations, the ones who sort of embedded in the systems, is that they're not usually change makers. Change makers to me come from the grassroots, come from the ground up, come from community. When you have someone who's embedded in the top seat of the bank, they're going to be talking to a lot of other bankers. They're going to be talking to corporate interests. They're going to be talking to lobbyists. And I don't think that that is a person who is going to be in touch with the everyday issue. And so his first moves in the first 10 days has not been impressive to me, largely because he's doing what I would expect a central banker to do. He is talking about the economy without talking about people. He's talking about corporations without talking about workers. He's talking about rural communities without talking to farmers. And I struggle because when we have, captains of industry in charge of countries, we oftentimes see things going very wrong. They will enrich shareholders. They will take care of the other captains of industry, but are they going to pay attention to the single mom with 3 kids? Are they going to pay attention to the person who is living with multiple health issues, who is waiting for a family doctor? I don't think so. I think you're going to have a government that's going to be more out of touch because of what I've seen in his first 10 days. And his first 10 days, he's given income tax breaks to millionaires and billionaires, as well as to some lower income individuals, without making a differentiation, which I think is very dangerous. You can't treat the working class like the ruling class. It is not equitable. So a 1% discount to a 1% reduction to income tax to someone who is, working class, struggling working class, versus 1% to the upper 1%, it's millions of dollars of tax breaks versus, a $50 tax break. That's not equitable. And that's what we've seen from Mark Carney so far, which is why I didn't come to him with any preconceived notions, but I was open to it. But after seeing his first 10 days of announcements, I now know we're going to have a very conservative prime minister if he's reelected, and we're going to see harmful neoliberal politics because he is going to expect the free capitalist market to fix itself. And we know, as a Democrat, I know that the free capitalist market does not take care of workers and the working class.
Right, yeah, it's going to be very conservative on either side because you've got,
you've got Poilievre on one side and Mark Carney on the other side. The only major difference is that Mark Carney, I think, is honest enough to admit that he's an elite globalist, whereas you have Poilievre, who pretends to not be a lifelong politician and a man of the everyday people, but who has lived in Ottawa for most of his life, in the House of Commons for most of his life, who's qualified for a pension at the age of 30-something. And they both pretend that they actually that they could represent the moms and parents of Regent Park, the people of Regent Park. I just don't see it.
You've also highlighted Dr. Samantha Green's campaign for Toronto Centre in the upcoming federal election. What role do you see Toronto Centre playing in sending a progressive voice to Ottawa?
Man, that's a good question. Samantha Green is a person of substance. She's a high intellect, but also someone who's really easy to talk to. She lives in Moss Park, right adjacent to Regent. She's a family doctor. She's a mother of 3, so she's 3 young children too. So she's juggling motherhood and having a professional practice. And she's decided to put her name in for the NDP. Now, the woman of this qualifications as a family physician, she could have run for the Liberals. She could have been a hot pick for the Conservatives. She chose the New Democrats. And so I'm very excited about Samantha's election here. in Toronto Centre because she's local. The Liberals have had a wonderful history of picking star candidates who don't live in our community, who are not from our community. And I had a wonderful relationship with Marcy Ian. I think the world of her. But prior to Marcy Ian, we had Bill Graham. We had people who are constantly being parachuted in by the Liberal Party to pick up the seat of Toronto Centre. And I think it shows two things. One is a high level of disrespect, is that you assume that you can just pick up this seat and make it yours without ever earning it. And two, I think it also shows a certain level of arrogance because, you got to have community connections. I think community is so important. Like, why are you in this role of trying to be an advocate for the community if you're not from the community? If you don't know your neighbors' names, how are you going to represent them? If you don't know your neighbors' needs, how are you going to represent them? And the new Liberal candidate coming in, I understand he doesn't live in Toronto. This man lives in Ottawa. And so I just can't imagine how someone who doesn't live in Toronto, who doesn't know our neighborhood here in Regent Park, how can this new Liberal federal candidate possibly be a champion of Regent Park and a champion of Toronto Centre if he's not from our community? And so that's why I'm very proudly happy to support Dr. Samantha Green. I know she'll be a very effective advocate. She's honest, she's hardworking, she's really, I think, everything that we need.
Nice.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you so much. This has been a wonderful interview.
Thank you very much, I appreciate that.
You're watching RPTV News. Thanks for watching.
Don't forget to like, share, subscribe to our YouTube channel, and visit us on all our social media platforms. Please visit our website for more information.